I think it's tempting to see the interpretation of the resurrection in terms of kind of a zero-sum game. Either we take a kind of historical, literal approach. If we do, it means we can't read all the sort of psychological implications into it, all the symbolic interpretations into it. But I don't see the problem there. I think
it's the opposite.
We can say that the event of the resurrection was a historical event, that it was at least a historical event, but it's so much more than that. It's also the axiom of history within Christianity. It's the moment that reveals what God achieves on the cross, as it were. It's completed on the cross, but then it's sort of unveiled through the event of the resurrection. That's, as it were, God leaving his signature on the processes of history.
What inclined you to begin to regard this as true?
Well,
what sense of truth?
Well, that's part of the question I'm asking.
Okay.
That it happened.
And what do you mean true?
So
that it happened.
There'd be multiple layers of truth. We might say there's a symbolic understanding, there's a moral understanding, there's a scriptural, typological fulfillment. But when I first came to these passages and looked at the texts, I studied ancient history. I'd read a lot of Thucydides and Herodotus and Tacitus at university. And I came to these passages and I thought, well, I've got to treat these texts as historical documents, at least by the same standards as I applied to those ancient pagan historians. And when I read them, I came to the view that this was plainly as well attested a historical event as almost any other in the ancient world. Better attested than Caesar crossing the Rubicon, better attested than the death of Augustus. The skepticism comes with the miraculous nature of it. And you might say, well, it can't possibly happen. And I remember having a lunch with a friend, an atheist friend, and talking him through the evidence, or what I thought to be the strong evidence. He said, well, I just don't believe it. I'm not interested in this evidence. I said, well, what if I showed you, what if we could see a DVD, if we could actually see a film of it happening? And he said, oh, I don't care. I wouldn't be convinced. I said, well, what if we got into a time machine and we went back to the tomb on Easter morning and we just observed it, we watched it, we saw it happening. Would you believe it then? He said, no.
Well, and lots of
dead people stay dead.
But lots of people don't, too.
What I'm saying is,
Christ performs his miracles, they're not all convinced
exactly.
at all.
What I'm saying is you can't come to this and assess it as a historical event if your philosophical priors rule out the possibility of the miraculous.
Christ is a master at using short, mysterious stories. They change the listener who takes them seriously.
The person that you do not think could ever be virtuous, well, let me show you. This is the person who is fulfilling the law and the prophets.
I don't believe in that promise. I'll just be honest at this point.
Then it hit me. I saw it.
This Jew is very frightened of a post-Christian society.
The power of love.
I don't want to be in a Hallmark card, I tell you.
We've got our work cut out for us, gentlemen. I sure hope we're up to the task. You have this notion that you trot forward fairly frequently, that well, with regards to the Big Bang theorists, you know, one of the things that you proclaim, which I think is very devious and interesting, is that every account of being is predicated, including the scientific accounts, is predicated on one thing that can't be explained. I mean, the Big Bang theorists say straight out that the laws of physics themselves break down at the moment of the release of the singularity, right?
Well,
and so there's no difference between that and saying that initial event, which can't be accounted for by the scientific rules that we know, is miraculous.
We know currently, though.
Well, no,
that would be the counter.
No, the claim is
no.
The Big Bang.
The very nature of any system. The very nature of any system is that the elements of the system cannot account for its origin.
Yes.
At every level of everything that exists.
Yes, that's true.
You can never account for the identity of something with the parts. And so you can apply that to the entire cosmos, you can apply it to your car. You can account for the meaning of something and the origin of something.
And just to be clear, the claim is not that there's no explanation of how the Big Bang might have come about. It's just that if your theory of the origins of space-time is the Big Bang, then the laws of physics, which can only relate to the domain of space and time, are silent on it.
Right.
They neither falsify nor verify it. It's got to be some other explanation. So too with the miraculous.
But the point is, for me, is that if there's an aspect of which before we analyze whatever, there's a given. There's a miracle that precedes explanation. This miracle explains more than the Big Bang. Because the Big Bang doesn't account for what it means to be human, what it means to encounter each other, what it means to sacrifice, what it means to love each other. Whereas this miracle, the resurrection, the death and resurrection of Christ, accounts for all, I believe, all of human interaction.
If the materialist, atheist explanation accounted for, so to speak, those things, we wouldn't have a crisis of meaning. Well, because we have a crisis of meaning because those reductive explanations lack, well, they have no relationship to meaning, for example. They leave that just out of the equation entirely. And maybe you could say meaning is epiphenomenal, and so you don't need a materialist account, but it's not epiphenomenal.
You can't, if you said meaning is epiphenomenal, you're engaging in a profound performative contradiction.
Yeah.
I agree, John, I agree with that.
But so I'm on board with that. But first of all, naturalism doesn't have to be identified with everything that's derivable from your science. It's also, extended naturalism is also everything that is presupposed by your science. So in that sense, there's nothing unnatural about Gödel's incompleteness theorem, or the fact that you can't derive a stronger logic from a weaker logic logically. These are all, this is part of how intelligibility works. Now, I'm hesitant to immediately assimilate that to the miraculous, because that would render many things that many people would not consider miraculous. And I think that's an unfair move to make.
Do you think that there's that's a...
The miraculous, we tried to talk about this before, I think we talked about it here, which is that the best way to understand the miraculous is the way in which phenomena moves into meaning, in a manner that the phenomena doesn't fully account for the meaning that is being revealed.
That's the case of a logical system.
I totally agree.
That's why computational systems
the miracle
can't capture
is
meaning.
everywhere. If you could see it, the miracle is in every phenomena in the world. We just need sometimes to see it at a higher level for you to be able to see it. The miracle is everywhere. The world is filled with miracles, nonstop.
It also seems to me that this Gödel notion is you have a system that has a bounded area of application, and then it's predicated on axioms that aren't within that purview, but that's nested. So that goes, it's like the turtles all the way down. That continues to be the case as you move down to more and more fundamental levels. And the farther down you move in that nested axiomatic system, the more the distal axioms start to look miraculous.
Well, no, see, I don't think that's the right way. I don't know if we want to go down this rabbit hole. Like, the thing that happens is if you have a logic, you have to move to a large, if you're in predicate logic and you want to move to modal logic, you have to introduce axioms. So, right, and you can keep doing that. There's nothing that prohibits you from doing that. The difficulty is there's no logical way to go from one logic, from a weaker. I can run all possible permutations of predicate logic and I'll never get modal logic. Right. That's the problem. Right. It's not that you're getting to the bottom turtle, it's that you see that there's something in the very act that can't be captured by any logical system. It's not out here. It's immanent. It's a transcendent that is truly immanent to the whole logical project.
But that's what the resurrection is. Right? The resurrection is that there are a bunch of dead things, and then all of a sudden they come together in something that brings them together higher. The resurrection is an image of reality. That's how all things work all the time. Things are constantly moving from their fragmented, broken identity into one. It's just that the resurrection is like this crazy, world-breaking version of it, where all of a sudden this dead body pops back into its identity, and it's like, okay, that's insane, that's crazy, but it's an image of everything. I really.
What did Elon Musk say recently? He was talking about the unfolding of consciousness out of the quarks and leptons that were left over the Big Bang. He said, well, at some point, hydrogen became conscious. It's like, we have no idea how that happened, right? And that is that fleshing out of a domain of higher possibility that's implicit somehow in the constituent elements, but not of it.
Yeah, that's what I think.
There's something there's something in this revelation of kind of ultimate reality that I want to bring out in relation to let's call it the way in which there's profound parallels, but they're not parallels in the sense of the eternal recurrence of the same, but a spiraling logic that takes up and transforms as it goes. So if you think back to Genesis 3, where the serpent uses Eve to bring about death, here God uses the killing of the son of Eve to destroy death. And I mean, God can't die. You know, that's what's really, in a way, going on in the Revelation. It's the revelation that God cannot be killed. At the very moment that evil thinks it has triumphed, it has lost. And there's this profound parallel right at the center there. And I think what you might say that what the biblical story as a whole is revealing about the nature of ultimate reality is that the result of total self-giving is not death, but life.
That's like the definition of eternal life.
Yeah. And isn't this, just very quickly, I mean, isn't this also something about the imagery here that, so you have evil. I mean, evil is a fact of our experience. And should you try to separate yourself from evil, or should one try to overcome evil through, at some level, embracing it? I don't mean accepting it, I mean
integrating it.
Yeah, and I think at the symbolic level, the resurrection is this is bracketing the miracle question. It is the representation of this victory over evil that has been through a process not of separation, but
of confrontation,
exactly.
direct. Yeah, well, and I think that's a profound question, because you can imagine, swamped as you might be by social media, that the best thing to do would be just to head for the hills,
exactly.
right? Yeah, and say to hell with it. You know, I'm not exactly that. I don't have anything to do with this. I can live my life out in peace. And this is the opposite of that. That you're required to take up arms against a sea of trouble, so to speak.